So you're feeling it, you're improvising, and this feels good. Oh, that's a nice chunk. This is a nice chunk. And then it's kind of like taking all of that into your brain and processing that so you can actually play that solo for this point of time. You know, much like what you would do with a technical, you know, metal band. You plan all that stuff out, but you still want it to feel like in the moment. So you're still performing that solo live. So it's like if you listen to a track on the record, you know, there might be one or two punch-ins, but that's probably it. In live, I may do that solo. I may stretch out and do something else. Rob will definitely stretch out and do something else because I think Rob is like, I don't want to do the same thing twice. I'm not going to learn the solo I did.
Hey, what's up, Vox and Hops heads? I'm Matt, the vocalist of Cryptopsy and the host of the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast, brought to you by Sound Talent Media and Evergreen Podcasts, where I sit down with fellow metal musicians. We talk all about their lives and music while sharing a craft beer. I hope that you've all been having a killer week so far. I most certainly have been. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I would just like to ask you to follow the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast on the podcast platform of your choice. But more than that, I would love for you to tell a friend about the podcast. If there's someone in your life that loves progressive metal, you should absolutely let them know that the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast exists. You can tell them that there are over 380 episodes where I sit down with some of the world's best metal musicians. We talk all about their lives and music while sharing a craft beer. If you were to encourage one of your prog-loving friends to become a brand new Vox and Hops head, that would be something that I would truly appreciate. Now, today on the podcast, I'm very stoked to be with Will Severin and Rob Lindquist of Crazy Swedes. Get ready, everyone. This is Vox and Hops episode number 388.
I warn you, what you are about to hear is very disturbing indeed.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Today, I'm very, very stoked to be joined by Rob Lindquist and Will Severin of Crazy Swedes. How you doing, guys?
Great.
Very, very stoked to be with you. When I got asked to have this conversation, I wasn't aware of the band, but we have strong beer connections. So I love that. Beer is an important part of my life. It seems to be an important part of your lives. So stoked to be hanging out with you. Let's ask the shittiest question, and then we'll have fun after there. How have you guys been coping throughout the glorious years of 2020, 2021, most of 2022? It's almost finished by the time this comes out. It's going to be 2023, so 2023 is going to be a better year. How have you guys been doing throughout all the madness that's been happening in our lives?
You know what? It's kind of interesting. The release that we just put out in late September really was a culmination of COVID. We did basic tracks, you know, before COVID hit, and Rob and I basically, it was kind of shelved for a little while. And then it was like, hey, guess we can't really, the way of live playing. So we basically decided, let's basically do what we can do in our home studios. And that's basically how we completed the record. So COVID in some ways was, I don't want to say it's a blessing, dude, but in some ways, you know, it let us kind of really hone in on the arrangements, hone in on the different sounds and things from a production aspect. And then, you know, basically the fruition of that became what the release is that came out just this past September. So for us, it was like, you know, making lemonade out of lemons, you know?
This is what we have to do. And it's interesting that the hustle and bustle of life, the way that we're so busy normally, the pandemic, the COVID sort of gave us permission to take a break, which allowed us to do a lot of these back burner projects. So I'm stoked that Crazy Swedes came to life out of something shitty. What are your thoughts about this, Rob?
I've always enjoyed making music with Will. And so it was one of those things where it's like, hey, now we have a little more time to do stuff from our basements and kind of go through some material and just kind of chisel away at this project. So it was kind of a blessing. And I know some people had a lot of tough time with COVID and it was horrible to all have to be locked up, but it does allow you to be creative and kind of make good use of the time if you're smart enough to like take advantage of that. So it was fun. You know, I would send him a track, he would send me a track, and we would do some things and just play around with some stuff as we got closer to working through the album. So
very, very cool. And it's cool in the modern age. I've said this before on the podcast. I'm very happy that the pandemic hit now as opposed to, you know, I know obviously I wasn't alive, but let's say in the 1800s or something. Well, there was plagues that happened back then too, but imagine like how disconnected we'd all be thanks to technology now, where we're much more connected than we would have been if there was no internet when the pandemic hit. We wouldn't have been able to do those file sharing. We wouldn't be able to have these Zoom meetings. There's the timing of it was beneficial for certain things. Vox and Hops is all about hanging out with my metal friends, talking about their lives and music while sharing a craft beer. What beers do you guys have on your side that we're going to be sharing virtually today?
Rob, you want to go first?
I just grabbed something kind of light, kind of reminiscent of maybe the warmer weather. Just grab the Fiddlehead Wit. Actually, haven't had that one yet, because that's I usually have their IPAs, and they're from Vermont. Fantastic brewery, and it's really good. So just nice. Let me think about the warm weather. Hopefully, we'll have in a few more months. So
that's so funny, because I literally just picked up a 12-pack of the Fiddlehead.
Wouldn't that be funny?
Yeah,
if we both had
that was actually my breakfast beer, believe it or not.
It's good.
It's tasty. It's very tasty.
How about you? How about you, Will?
All right, so let's see what I'm going to do first here. I've got this is from Vitamin Sea Brewing in Massachusetts, and this is Due North IPA.
Very nice.
If you haven't had Vitamin C yet, check Vitamin C out. Their triples, I kid you not, taste like singles.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they're just really well done. And they've done collabs with a number of other breweries. I know Equilibrium's done a number of things with them. There's been others, but Vitamin C is pretty damn solid.
Awesome. Definitely on my radar now, Will. Thank you so much. Now, I have two beers here, and they've been living in my fridge. And if you guys know where I'm headed with this, you guys have a YouTube thing where you drink good beers gone bad. So I've watched a bit of it. It's funny. I enjoyed it. So I have two of my collabs that have been living in my fridge for far too long. The actual very first canned Vox&Hops collab from Henderson Brewing. It's a black lager called Devastation. It was made for Devastation on the Nation 2020. So it's old. It's been living in my fridge. Shout out to Jamie Morris for making this happen. The very first canned Vox&Hops collab. I was so stoked when this came out, and then everything got canceled. It was anyways. And then I also have something that came out last year, which is also far past its prime. Double Vox&OVERHOPS, which is the Double New England from OverHop Canada, came out last year for the 3-year anniversary of Vox&Hops. I'm now at the 4-year, so this is a year-old New England. I don't know what this is going to be like. I have a feeling the hops are far past their prime, so let's see what's going on. Let's just see. I'll open them both, and the one that is most palatable, and people listening to this, I'm not giving any, I'm not saying that Henderson didn't do a good job. I'm not saying that OverHop didn't do a good job. It's just certain beers have shelf lives, and they change over time. As I'm cracking this, you guys are experts on this, so talk to me about that, why beers have shelf lives.
I feel like, and I always say this, and I think Will probably agrees with me, like, after the 3 months, all things fall apart. New England hazy, right? So like I've literally tried this with a lot of beers. Now some companies, it'll hold up better. Actually, the color's not half bad.
Yeah.
Some companies will, like I find like foam beers, which is also Vermont, Treehouse, Massachusetts, and a lot of people know Treehouse. Like those beers seem to last like pretty good 5-6 months. Will, would you say like they're still decent? But it's that 3-month mark for most beers. I'm not going to name some other brands, but they just fall apart. They're like sickly sweet, and they become oxidized. And being a brewer and stuff, I kind of have a little bit of that. I kind of find that my stuff does not hold up either. But then again, they have $1 million worth of equipment to guarantee that there's less oxygen getting into the beer and that kind of stuff too. So, but yeah, I mean, sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes I surprise myself, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty good.
No, some of the brews are damn good.
Yep.
So the color stands up on the Double Vox&OVERHOPS, as you mentioned. It has been kept cold the whole time, which definitely plays in its favor. The nose smells a little dead hoppy, a little more farty than I'd like it to be. Cheers.
Cheers.
What cardboard taste? Do you like wet cardboard taste?
It's actually not that bad. It's really not that bad. Cheers. I'm actually quite impressed. This one is quite foamy. This one is actually, it was living in my cupboard, and then it made its way into my fridge. I would say about 2 months ago. So, and it was tight when it was in the cupboard. So, the can, I mean. So I was like, ooh, I got to get this cold and I got to drink this soon. Let's see what this has got. It's got a nice flavor. It smells amazing still. This is actually really still very good. And that was my suspicion, was that the black lager was going to hold up. Very, very good. I don't know. Maybe I'll go back and forth throughout the interview. We'll see how this goes. Cheers. Talk about beer. I'd love to hear about your very first beers. Do you remember the first beers that you guys ever drank?
I have a pretty funny story. And that is, sure, I'd had various beers, but, it was really before I was cued into the whole craft beer scene, really before it was more of a movement. So I remember going to a party, and it's kind of funny because it was actually our bass player in Crazy Swedes, Eric Schwanke, invited me to a party that he had, and he's like, "You want a beer?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I'll have a beer." So, I'm looking at this beer, and I've never seen this before, and I open it, and it was Victory Hop Devil, a Victory out of Pennsylvania. And, this is old school, man. This is like, more West Coast type style. But for me, it was just like, what is this? And that just kind of like, from that point on, I just became a beer snob. You know what I mean? So,
that was the first beer that you've ever had? That's really interesting.
Well, not the first beer I'd ever had, but it's like nothing before that had ever been like appealing. It was like, yeah, whatever, I'll have a beer. It wasn't a thing, you know what I mean? But that was kind of a gateway where it was like, then you started searching out breweries, then you started searching out different styles of beers. That there was more to beer than, your, what do you want to say, your Molsons and your, Heinekens. It became kind of like, oh, okay, cool. This is actually like, there's an art here. There's something more, So, then we traveled, like, my wife and I, we've actually traveled just to drink. So, I mean, we've been to Belgium a number of times, places in Europe, and obviously all over the U.S. And Rob and I have visited a bunch of breweries here in the U.S. That's just like, yeah, it's not only a pastime, it's a passion. Rob's a killer brewer, and basically we have brewed some batches together, but it's inevitably an excuse to get together and drink. You know what I mean? So, who gathered what this week? Where did you go? What do you got? So it's like, we have our own big sampling thing. Invite a few other friends over while we're basically, while he's making a brew.
Fantastic. How about you, Rob? Do you remember that first beer, the very first beer?
Yeah, kind of. It was probably a tie between like Coors Light and I think Old English. and so I got a funny story, and I think it's the Old English because I was in a band, and my parents will probably never listen to this. This is okay, I can share. Basically, I was in a band. I was probably like 16 or 17 or whatever, maybe 16. And we were playing. I was always playing with older musicians because, I was able to, hang with some of the older kids, right? So we were, after a gig, I was talking about how it'd be great to have a beer. And they're like, you can, we'll get you a beer. And they bought me like, was it Old English 800 or one of those malt liquors? Boom. And they bought me two. And I think they're like 8%. And they're both like, massive. They're tall boys. They're like 20 ounces or whatever. So I got wrecked on that. And it was a pretty, it was a rough night. Let's put it that way. So my first drinking night was not hey, I got a nice buzz. It was here's the toilet. I'm going to sleep here for the rest of the night kind of thing. Man. But the next time I kind of figured a little bit more out. And as you know, even when you're older, you still don't always have that under control. You're like, oops, I guess I had a little too much this time. Well, no, it was a good hang, but unfortunately, the first time was rough.
How about the craft beer evolution? I heard Will told us about his gateway beer, that Victory Brew. How about that beer for you?
Right, a real beer. So my first real beer, I think, was probably, I want to say Unibrew.
Really?
If I say it wrong, I always say Modite or Mordite.
La Modite.
Of course, I said it perfect. And so, yeah, that was one of the first ones that I had. I think that was really, and maybe Sam Smith Nut Brown, actually. Sam Smith Nut Brown, when I was playing at this bar in Saratoga, I was probably like 18 or so. And they would always offer that. So maybe it was the Nut Brown, but yeah. And it's amazing, that difference too, when you have that, for you're like, oh, this is where it's at. And the first sip, I'm like, I thought it had a taste, thin and like toilet water or something, but no, it was great. It's great beer. And after that, it's like, once you get a taste for five things, it's like all things music or whatever, you just start going down that rabbit hole. And luckily I met Will. We were playing in a wedding band, and he turned me onto the hop stuff, because I wasn't really into the hoppy beers until I met him. I mean, just a little bit, maybe some Saranac Pale, more
Belgian style, more caramel English style than the hoppy haze style.
Yeah. So like all that, like Will was saying earlier, all that early stuff was West Coast, but back then it was just IPA, because there really was no East Coast. You know, it was just kind of IPA. It was hoppy or hoppier, and they were good. And to be honest, I tend to like go back to that sometimes. I just I miss some of that old school, like resiny, like sappy kind of thing, with a little hop bite. You know.
Absolutely. I made a collab like that last year with BG Brasserie Urbaine. We were revisiting old forgotten styles, and mine was a old school West Coast IPA. Unibrew, I used to be afraid of them. I was like super intrigued by their labels, because they're like metal looking and sort of way more interesting than, let's say, a Molson X.
Yep.
Label visually. But then the ABV would terrify me, because it was all 9% or something. So I was like, oh, I can't do that. But then finally I fell into Trois Pistoles, which was my favorite. Love that beer. But I'd always make the mistake. I would always make the mistake of getting two of the big bottles. And it was always too much. And then the next day was a bit of suffering, because one never felt like enough, right? But
it never does.
Two was too much. How about home brewing? At what point did you start brewing, Rob? What? So you get involved with Will, discover the hops. At what point do you start making your own beer?
I would say like when I was student teaching, I went up to Potsdam, which is actually not too far from Canada there. And I got into home brewing when I went to Watertown, New York, which I think is about 30 minutes from the border. So I just, at a whim, a lot of free time. I was doing, learning how to, student teach basically. And I had all this time to burn. And then I got into it around 90, 99, 2000. And then I, did it for about 2 or 3 years, made some okay-ish beers. There's a lot of like fine notes about it, like as far as like brewing temperatures and different things. So some of it I had to choke down, or you try to give to friends, and then they don't want to drink as much because it wasn't really awesome.
There's a lot of liters to get rid of.
Yes. Yes. And if you don't wash your bottles out, that makes for some really interesting tasting stuff. So then I took like a bunch of time off.
They're wild. It's farmy.
Yes. It was meant. It was open fermentation, whatever stuff's in the bathroom kind of floats in there and makes a different kind of beer. But no, I took a bunch of time off, and I didn't get back into it until about 2009 or so. Maybe, I don't know, Will might remember, but he had a kit. And I said, you know what? I used to do this. And then me and him were brewing pretty feverishly for a while. And then, life happens and you take breaks and stuff. But since then, pretty much 2009, 2010, I think, roughly in that period, I've been kind of brewing fairly frequently. So
amazing. It never became something that you were like, oh, this is something I want to make my career.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's just like art, it's like another thing to do. And anytime I can be creative, I feel like I can get into it. I can just kind of go down that rabbit hole a little bit. So we'll see where it ends up. Maybe in 10 years or so, I can open a little nano brewery or something. Me and Will kind of joke around about that sometimes.
You talk about that. It's true. Yeah.
Be fun.
What would you call it?
I don't know, man.
That's a
Drunk Swedes. Spin off.
Good Beer Gone Bad. How did that idea come about? And was it fun doing? Obviously it was, but hard to keep doing. Creating content is a lot of work. Most people don't seem to know that when you start something and then it's easy, but to keep it going is difficult.
Yeah, Rob, it was like that was Rob's idea. Rob started that out. He's like, Rob's father is a great guy. He basically likes to hoard beers, so he'll have beers that essentially are like, wow, this is in your garage and it's been there for 10 years and you haven't drank this. So that was, I think, the impetus for Rob to basically say, hey, we should do a little skit and, good beer's gone bad. Let's try these out and just see what happens. So it's kind of a lark, kind of an impromptu type thing. And then Rob basically cut, little videos together and stuff. But, Rob and I were just amused by the whole thing. So it was really, I think, for ourselves more than anything else. And hey, hopefully other people dig it. You know what I mean? But, we'll probably get back on that horse at some point. But Rob, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, it's just, You know, I was going to say, like, your beer you have in front of you there, you say is old, is probably fresh in my dad's book. I mean, that's like fresh beer.
Oh, yeah.
We literally would open some, and then sometimes we'd be surprised. We don't actually, this is sort of palatable. Like, you know, and
that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, it's completely homespun. I mean, we're not putting any real effort. We are going to probably, I have just a few videos. I have a new one I've been sitting on since COVID. I just haven't gotten around to finishing it. But at some point, we'll do it up real and get some good, you know, lapel mics or something and put some real effort into it. Right now, it's just kind of jokey, you know, just for fun, kind of like throw your camera up literally and put a little title screen on it. But we may take it to the next level because Will's got a lot of skills and a lot of knowledge and people that he works with, that we could actually make it look a little bit more polished down the road. So that might be fun.
Very, very, very cool. Classic Vox and Hops question. When you were growing up in your parents' or guardians' house, what music was playing? When you were not in control of the radio, what music did your parents or guardians listen to?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, my dad was a big classical music guy. So it was interesting because it's like, I mean, he was always pretty much, it was like classical music or Sinatra, essentially.
Really?
Yeah. But then there were certain proggy type things that appealed to him, which I was really surprised by. Because, I mean, it's like, you know, that's how I was introduced to Tchaikovsky, to Mozart, to Wagner. You know, I mean, he was really big into opera. But then on the proggy side of things, it's like, okay, Moody Blues, Nights in White Satin, you know, that was like constantly playing. Or Rick Wakeman, Journey to the Center of the Earth. So you got into some of these concept-y things, which was really surprising if you knew him. So that was kind of my background. And then, you know, before I actually got into, you know, metal became a serious thing for me. And then it was more instrumental guitar type music, but it kind of all spawned out of that. But before that, it was soundtrack music. Like when I was a kid and I saw Star Wars for the first time, that was like one of the first records that I got was like the soundtrack for Star Wars. So I was like, and I compose actually scores for like films and commercials and things like that. So that's a whole like other side. That's kind of how I make my living, producing commercials and, you know, film stuff. But, you know, for me, I was like big into metal and like, you know, like the early 80s. That was it for me, you know, and then some of the hair metal I was into. But it was like a lot of the shredders, like, you know, like Yngwie Malmsteen was a huge influence early on. You know, I was big into that. And then I kind of started to gravitate a little bit more towards, you know, more fusion oriented stuff like Steve Morris, Dixie Dregs, you know, finding like, you know, Mahavishnu Orchestra and stuff that even kind of predated when I was growing up. And that's kind of what Crazy Swedes kind of came out of. It was like, this is the band that I envisioned. Like, I wish I was in this band when I was 17. You know what I mean? It's the kind of stuff I want to do. And so it's like, it's a labor of love sidebar project. But that's, I guess, hey, there's a musical genesis bringing us up to Crazy Swedes. I'll toss it over to Rob.
You know, along with the hoarding habits my dad has, he's also a giant record collector. And I think that's, so he's a disc jockey, worked in Boston for a little bit and was local to the Capital District around Albany, New York. But so I don't even know how many records. We're talking like 5 digits, like 25, 30,000 records, something like that. Yeah, no, it's an obscene amount. And that's going to be one of my tasks as winter is to try to help put it all on an Excel sheet because it's just so much for him as a guy. It's in the 70s but anyway, he used to listen to like a lot of Motown, doo-wop stuff, and he used to have all sorts of stuff playing. So I think when I look back at it, so I wasn't thinking about it at the time, but I think there was so much influence in my playing, probably based on all the stuff I was listening to. It could be anywhere between doo-wop, you know, some like psychedelic 70s kind of music, some new age music, just different things that was playing. And I feel like I owe a lot to him as far as like those influences kind of affecting how I play as a musician and the things I listen to. But I would say just a mix. I can't even tell you. Probably no metal though. Like he wasn't into that, but I got into like all sorts of different like rock and progressive rock stuff as I got into my teens.
Keys, like it makes sense why you fell into the guitar, Will. The metalhead, the Yngwie. For yourself, Rob, gravitating toward the keys, where did that come from?
Well, that was like my primary instrument when I was like 8 or 9, whenever I started playing. Was
that like a choice, or was that like you're taking piano lessons?
It was like taking piano lessons initially, and it wasn't until I quit that I kind of
found your own voice. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like, oh, this is actually fun now that I'm not being forced to play some goofy, like, thing out of the book. And then I kind of was starting to play by ear, trying to learn stuff by ear. And that's the stuff that kind of allowed me to unlock some of like, okay, I actually have a good ear. I can do this stuff. I can improvise. And then I started showing up to like the recitals and playing songs I wrote instead of other things.
No way. But at least you had a cool teacher that let you do that.
Exactly.
She was reluctant at first, but she's like, well, he's not doing the other stuff. Yeah, like I'd play like a Mozart piece, and then like the end would be like 8 measures of something else. And she'd be like, all right, why don't you just do your own thing next time? So, but I think that's also what is really nice about what me and Will have too, is that we're both like improvising, we both like creating, and it's we kind of kindred spirits in that way.
I've got a really good story. Just backing off what Rob was just saying, but how I started playing guitar. I remember it was like basically it was finished middle school, about to go into junior high. Well, the only knowledge I had of what was going on in junior high or high school was my older brother. Now, my older brother George Snyder is the drummer in Crazy Swedes. Okay, so there's a whole, so everybody that came over to the house played an instrument, because there was always like band rehearsals going on at my house in the basement. So it was my brother and whatever band he was in. So all I knew was that everybody that basically like was in junior high or high school had long hair and played an instrument.
You had no choice.
Yeah, I assumed that was like a thing. So I guess, okay, I'm going to junior high. So Mom and Dad, can I get a guitar for Christmas? And, and I started growing my hair, and I get to junior high, and it's like, not what I thought at all.
You were the outcast, right?
Totally. But by that point, the guitar like actually stuck, because I just started to get into the music and started to get into the instrument, and that was just, there you go. But so it's, I guess if I have anybody to thank or blame, it would be my older brother.
Amazing. The guitar is always there for you, though.
It's true. It is.
It's tough being an outcast in high school, but it makes us strong. First shows. Do you remember the first music experience you went to go see?
Rob, you go first. I got to think about this one.
No, I'm still thinking too. I don't know. I went through like a stint of like listening to Christian rock for a while.
That's okay. It's your path.
Yeah. So I think it might have been like Petra, like one of those early like Striper or Petra, man. I think it was one of the first like rock and roll shows back in like, I don't know, early 90s, late 80s, maybe something like that.
Before the grunge train. Yeah.
Yeah, they had a rotating stage.
Wow.
I forget where that was.
Cool.
It was kind of cool though. But yeah, then I shortly after that was like, all right, there's way more interesting stuff to listen to. There were some good Christian bands, but they were always trying to like basically rip off the other bands. But yeah, I don't know. I think it was that, and I actually saw this guy. It was really inspiring to me, and I'm not really a guitar player, but I just wanted to play. He had this like really interesting way of like tapping on the neck. Named Phil Keggy. He's just like
Phil Keggy. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
He's and like he came from like a Christian background stuff, but he really broke into some interesting stuff. His electric and his acoustic playing was like phenomenal, and he did some really A-level stuff. So I remember going to see him a couple times, like going out to Buffalo and just 6-hour trip, and just loving watching him play and changing styles. He'd sound like Eric Johnson one minute, and next minute he'd be like sound like Michael Hedges or something like that.
I was just going to say the whole Michael Hedges thing. I totally always thought there's a thing there,
Yeah. So that's some of the earlier stuff I remember, but I'm sure I saw stuff when I was a kid. I just don't remember. Nothing was super memorable like that. But
so first concerts for me were I remember seeing Yes on the 90125 tour, and they kind of doing the whole commercial comeback thing. And then the other show that I remember was and I went for the opening act, not for the headliner, but it was like my brother dragged me along. It was Alcatraz with Yngwie Malmsteen. Yeah. And I think the headliner was Ted Nugent. I think we left before Ted started playing. You know what I mean? It was like not
which you were you knew what you were doing even back then.
Exactly. Amen, brother.
How about your first time on stage?
Wow, first time on stage? It's probably like high school battle of the bands or some business like that. There's that rite of passage that I think a lot of little rockers have. But I do remember actually Battle of the Bands for me was even then instrumental.
Really?
And mostly like stuff we had composed.
Very cool. So that's odd. A lot of people where we'd be like, and I've done this with lots of people, and it's typically like cover band. So even back then, and you too, Rob, where you're doing the recitals and then you're composing already. So it's very cool that even at such a young age, you guys were composers. It's amazing.
I guess it's just one of those innate things. I guess you don't really think that you're doing a thing. It's just kind of like, oh, this just feels natural.
Yeah.
You know?
And no vocals. Was that a necessity, or was it because you couldn't find someone, or was it you knew your voice?
No, it was for me because a lot of the stuff that I was listening to at the time. So it was like Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, Steve Morse, things like that. So it was kind of like that's what I aspired to or wanted to emulate. So it was just like, hey, let's do a 3-piece and do kind of like cool instrumental stuff.
There wasn't a bunch of like metal bands trying to steal you?
No.
Weird. Yeah.
I actually later on became a vocalist, but that was only out of necessity. We had a number of bands through the years that, I'd be writing a lot of the material, but we would eventually just lose our vocalists. And I got so frustrated that I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start singing.
Let's not rely on these other humans, these LSD people. Lead singer syndrome.
LSD. Lead singer
disease is what it is. LSD, yeah.
But so for me, it became one of those things where it's like, hey, if I suck, I can deal with that more than somebody bailing. You know what I mean? So I stuck with it. And, I'm a decent vocalist. You know what I mean? I think I'm a better guitar player than I am a vocalist, but it's definitely something I do. So yeah, I came to that much later.
I love that. How about your first show? It must have been a piano recital.
Yeah, well, I guess I don't really count those like piano recitals. I mean, I think my first like really performing was at this band, like where people are paying or whatever, door cover to come see me kind of thing. Was at this place called Mother's Earth Cafe, I think in Albany.
I know that place.
And, you remember that place? Dude,
yeah, totally.
Yeah, some interesting stuff there. They used to have like just bands in. You make like, probably tip jar kind of stuff, or they have a $1 door cover or something goofy like that. But
you get paid your first gig. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was. I might have done like a coffee house thing at some point. I just don't remember. But I remember this being like the first kind of real gig, and I actually brought equipment. It's like I had like these old Bose speakers and trying to run sound, and all the cables didn't work well. It was one of those wild experiences, and everything's feedbacking. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just bringing my dad's stuff that he had left over from DJing in the day, and we were hooking up and we're playing, and we had some crazy songs. We had one called Ron Jeremy. We had an instrumental called Ron Jeremy, which was interesting. And I didn't understand the origin story of that name, but it was like a 10-minute instrumental, and that was pretty fun. And then we had some other songs, and then I remember there being like some kind of drama, like we went too long. We were the opening band, and the second band was all annoyed with us. But that was some of my earliest days, and it was fun, And I was always kind of the guy that kind of like, I was more of a jazz, even back then I was more of a jazz head. So I kind of like was trying to encourage the band to like do more than like 2 chords, like throw a couple of 7th chords in there and that kind of stuff. So, but it was fun. It was probably like 16 or 15 or something like that.
Very, very cool. Opening bands that are listening to this, you got to finish on time though. Don't listen to Rob. It's not acceptable.
It's not acceptable. I agree with you, man. I've been on the other side of that coin too.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? I mean, we got to be respectful, but there's like some insecurity sometimes from the other bands. Like we are your opener. We are your opener, but we get it. You're the main people.
Crazy Swedes. It took a pandemic to make it happen. You had to basically start your own projects that you've always wanted to be in, Will. You guys are collaborating together after being in wedding bands together, jamming together. Something that's interesting about the whole thing that I don't know if maybe I'm just not familiar with the genre enough, but jam bands and like, is that something that still happens in 2022 and 2023? I feel like it's not as popular as it used to be in the 70s and the 80s, let's say.
Dude, honestly, I think you do actually. It still is a thing. You look at bands like Mo, Fish.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like they're still going strong, and there's like other bands that are Twiddle. There's other bands that
Yeah.
are still trying to emulate that whole thing. You know what I mean? So I think we're kind of an outlier. It's like, I guess we maybe have one foot in that because of like the improvisational aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that what we're doing is also more polished and more technical.
Okay.
So it really is kind of like we've got one foot in the 70s and 80s, kind of like jazz fusion era, like classic stuff. And, you know, it's interesting. Like a lot of the notices that we've received or, you know, reviews, whatnot, do kind of touch on that it's like, this is a breath of fresh air insofar as it has the nostalgia, but it's also has a foot in today.
Amazing.
You know what I mean? So for us, we really didn't think about, hey, we're looking to appeal to this crowd or that crowd. We made music and it was for us.
I'm in a technical death metal band, so every second, every beat, everything is organized, discussed, put there for a reason. We fought for everything, basically. Very different from what you guys are doing, because there's a structure, but you have freedom. And the song is always just a little bit different. Like if you play what's on the record, which we're talking about, Crazy Swedes, that came out in September, if you do it live, it won't be that, basically.
It'll never be exactly the same.
So that's interesting. How do you know when it's done? Like on the record, how do you know when you're satisfied? It's like an infinite portal of any possibilities, of any notes, of any combinations that could have been there. How did you know that was the one that you wanted to showcase to the world?
That's interesting. I'll go first, then I'll toss it over to Rob. But I think when we were talking about the record as opposed to what we would do in a live performance, because in a live performance, it's like, okay, here's our intro, here's your hook. And then it's basically, okay, we got this progression and toss it off to whoever, and they're going to basically solo over these changes. And then they're going to cue you when they're finished. Okay, I'm ready to go. We'll go into the next section. And then it's basically somebody else's turn, you know, kind of in more of a traditional jazz sense, where you're just tossing things back and forth, right? I think the difference for us on the record was, okay, we have to make this a finite thing because you can't go on forever.
You could put multiple versions of it. It'd be so cool.
I know, right? But I think the challenge for us was to think about, I didn't want this to be a live document. I wanted this to be kind of a little more polished, but not too polished, produced, but not too produced. So, you know, basically for me, okay, well, this is the finite time that you have to basically improvise your thing over. And then for me, at least the way I work, I would do a number of passes and to the point where you're essentially writing your solo. So you're feeling it, you're improvising, and this feels good. Oh, that's a nice chunk. This is a nice chunk. And then it's kind of like taking all of that into your brain and processing that so you can actually play that solo for this point of time, you know, much like what you would do with a technical, you know, metal band. You plan all that stuff out, but you still want it to feel like in the moment. So you're still performing that solo live. So it's like, if you listen to a track on the record, you know, there might be one or two punch-ins, but that's probably it. It's like oh, I learned it's enough to basically get this down so that this is what it is on the record. In live, I may do that solo. I may stretch out and do something else. Rob will definitely stretch out and do something else because I think Rob is like, I don't want to do the same thing twice. I'm not going to learn the solo I did. So it's kind of funny when we were doing actually the videos for the record. I already had to learn the solo. You know what I mean? So it's like, you know, you basically had to learn the solo because that's what you're supposed to be playing. So,
yeah.
But that was kind of, you know, the difference between doing the record and doing, you know, something that would be live. Like live, it will always be a little different. But I'm really happy with the way the record came out. I mean, the co-producer that I work with, Chris Tice, got a couple Grammys, and I've known him forever. He works on a lot of my stuff. You know, we have our own shorthand. Rob and I have our own shorthand. You know, George and Eric basically lock up, and, you know, they're obviously part of the whole, you know, recipe that makes Swedes what it is. But I'll hand it over to Rob to talk a little bit about the record and kind of.
Yeah, no, I think like pretty much everything Will said, you know, is accurate. Like, I mean, we definitely have a structure. I wouldn't say it's jams in the sense of just a simple head or some simple melody, and then we just kind of play. But there's definitely structured things that happen, and then maybe under a solo, that part gets inserted or different things happen. But yeah, generally speaking, we have like kind of like a framework, and then we're able to explore with that framework. You know, we know where the drum outro is going to be, you know, but when it comes to the solos, yeah, I think also for me, and I've done a good share of transcribing as a jazz head, so like I have no problem. But yeah, learning my solo on a couple of those tunes was like, gee whiz, why did I play so many notes? I have to go back and like learn this now. But I
egged you on with the notes. I think I egged you on, so you know.
Yeah, I did. Well, I just, you know, there's this one tune we did, and I took like a double solo. I thought it'd be clever to do like a Fender Rhodes solo going into a synth, like a lead solo kind of thing. And I was like, oh geez. So it was a little long winded on that one, but it was fun to learn and to be able to play back some of that stuff. But I just enjoy creating on the spot, and I think because I improvise so often in other works and other things that I do, I just feel comfortable in that way. And it's not all going to be gold, you know. Obviously, you're going to have better times than other times, but I feel like I actually feel better playing live than I do studio because I got the cans on, and I'm just like, don't like this. A little self-loathing kicks in when you start playing, and you have to like, let's do another take. And then when you get to like 3 or 4 takes,
a microscope right on you.
Yeah. I just like, you're like, you hear every little thing. Yeah, exactly. So, but no, it's great. We had a lot of fun, and you know, some post-production stuff was kind of cool too, to be able to do some layering, and that's where COVID was nice to be able to do some of that.
Well, it's interesting. It's like one of the tracks on the record that became one of my favorite was, to me, like we would do it live, and it was like my least favorite song to play. It's like, we'll fill the set out, so we got to do this. But, you know, because of COVID, because we had the time, it's like, you know, I ended up kind of working the arrangement a little bit more and worked a whole like horn section into it. And, you know, a good friend of ours came in and did a couple trumpet solos, and it became something different. And it's like one of my favorite cuts on the record. You know, it's What's on Tap is the name of the cut. Total beer reference. There's a lot of references on the record, even the titles, you know, flight number 4, What's on Tap, you know.
Amazing.
But but it's one of those things where you know, when you have the time to break things down, you have the time to kind of, you know, be smarter about it, or somehow like you're afforded the time to be more creative. You just find different things that you didn't see when you're just kind of blowing through things live. So, you know, I think for Rob, it was like different layers, finding different like parts, you know, for me, even with the guitar, same type of thing. It was like orchestrating those things where, these parts work better together, even though we'll never be able to do it exactly this way live because you don't have that many, you know, hands, you know, or, hey, we're going to put a horn section in this tune and we're going to bring a trumpet player in. So that's, you know, the freedom of time to kind of like, you know, make things a bit more interesting or think about things in a different way and kind of bring that to fruition was, yeah, that was awesome.
I think I finally understand the whole Fish thing now, and why the Grateful Dead, why people followed them and watched all the shows, aside from the culture. It's just every show was a little bit different. And if you were that avid of a fan, you could appreciate that and see from day to day how a song can evolve, even with it staying within the same framework. I think I'm finally understanding that. So I'm happy that we had this conversation, so that I finally understand why all these people just gave up everything to follow these bands that they loved.
Well, it's interesting because it's like, well, I would first say maybe this is controversial, but you know, hey, I guess Swedes would be like maybe somewhat tangentially related to some of those bands, but without the drugs, it's beer instead. So that's why we're talking to you. So that's one, you know. But then 2 would be, you know, I get where you're coming from with the whole like technical thing, because, you know, one of the other acts that I was in, everything was literally down to the beat and everything was very technical. I mean, the drummer basically like played to a click.
We have to, basically.
Yeah. I'll have to shoot you like some of the Infinite Spectrum stuff that you would probably dig it, man. I mean, we did like the last record that we did that was actually released was a concept record based on H.P. Lovecraft's Haunter of the Dark. So you would probably dig that, but there's like, you know, all kinds of blast beats, all kinds of crazy shit going on. You know what I mean? So
I remember when Will played some of that for me, I was like, it was pretty killing. I remember all the work that he put in to really bring that that group up to the next level. You know, I heard earlier examples, and then I heard what he was doing, so he put so much effort into it. And I remember the first thing I think is like, why aren't you playing guitar in this? Because it was like, you know, he's singing on the whole thing, and I'm like, oh my God, you should be playing guitar. You're just as good as that guy. And it was kind of interesting to see him just like say, nope, I'm going to be the lead man. I'm going to be the front guy, and I'm just going to do the vocals. And it was kind of wild, but there's a lot of layers and really interesting stuff. And I think he did some underscoring in there. He was putting in like really interesting, like, you know, string, soft synth parts and stuff. It was pretty cool to hear.
Yeah, just trying to make it a little more cinematic, even though it's like totally metal, you know, progressive metal.
Right.
But, you know, a lot of like, you know, cinematic elements as well. You know, so
Obviously, I love collabs. I love making things with my logo on it. I've released 60 beer collabs in the past 4 years. I've done some stuff for Cryptopsy. I've done coffees. I've done teas. If you can make a perfect collab for Crazy Swedes, what would it be? Obviously, it's a beer. What style of beer would it be? What would you call it? And if there's a brewery out there that you'd love to collaborate, why not give a shout out? It might happen. You never know.
My buddy Steve Parker in Fidens in Colony, New York, which is pretty close here.
Killer's brewery.
Yeah,
Killer.
up and coming, big time. You know, he's moving fast. He's making some good pacing. But there's so many breweries. You know, so many good breweries we like in Vermont, Mass. But you know, like the Treehouse, Trillium, Foam, all those kind of places that are awesome. But around here, that guy seems to be up and coming, I think, for sure.
Oh, I think he's definitely, you know, among the top tier of what we have, like, in this region.
Yep.
And it's really good stuff, man. I mean, basically selling out all the time. So he's not distributing much yet. It's still pretty much, and he's been doing a lot of collabs with like other, you know, notable breweries. So yeah, Fidens is definitely one to look out for you as well. That's something that you should check.
I'm writing it down right now.
I'm a big Vermont guy, but you know who I'm really a huge fan of is OverHop. OverHop Brewing is amazing. I guess if I was going to say, hey, could you do a collab with somebody, I would say, hey, can we make it OverHop? That would be right now.
Can you guys agree on a style? What is the perfect style for Crazy Swedes?
Oof. He knows what I'm going to say, so that's why I'm like looking at him.
Well, I would like to say hop forward. We can start there. Probably hazy, like a juicy kind of thing.
Probably.
But we do like everything, really. Yeah. You know, we like all, you know, speaking of different styles, here's one that for contrast.
Yeah.
Or Steiner, a little German, like amberish, you know, lager. So I'm going to try.
You know what I've been really digging lately that is not all that popular is I dig the extra special bitter, man. The ESB.
Yeah,
they're coming back, man. I've seen a lot of breweries starting to do those. That's coming back. I'm loving the old school styles that are being rediscovered by hop heads, because it's always the same journey, right? We hook people in with the hops and the big juicy, slightly sweet IPAs, and then they get that into the pastry stouts. They're like, oh man, this is beer, smoothie sours. I love beer. And then they get totally over that, and then they want to drink Crispy Boys, Czech lagers, and then rediscovering other more styles, more like just more complex and more refined, right? So there's more to beer than sugar, people.
So true.
It's like you're in a different mood sometimes too. It's like when you watch a show, you're not going to always watch, you know, an action thing, or you're not going to always watch like a, you know, thriller. So it's like, I feel like beer, it's like, you know, it's just different moods you're in, different seasons. The one season I think that could probably go to hell would be pumpkin beers. Sorry, I swear.
I don't disagree with you, man. I
you know what it is? I don't mind the maltiness. I don't even mind like a squashy kind of pumpkin-y flavor. They can kind of get that somehow. I just don't like it when it tastes like a melted down Yankee Candle. You know, that's my thing. Like, I just, you know, if it's just like tons of like a clove bomb, nutmeg bomb, it's like I can do that myself. I could take some Jamaican jerk and just throw that in my beer. I don't need. So that's where I draw a line. And I also draw a line, I think, in a similar fashion to like pastry stouts. To like, I love a good, IPAs. I love good, imperial stouts. But when they're so sweet, like I want to split that with like Will or somebody else.
You have to.
I'm not
feel sick. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like I don't need, if I want a dessert, or whatever, or some of those are great if you left one out, reduce it, make like a sauce out of it.
Ooh,
throw
very
on some
cool.
steak or chicken. It's fantastic. One time, Will, I remember, left an Imperial Stout in the freezer because we were trying to chill it down. We left it for like 2 hours.
Yeah, we do that. Yeah.
And then we drank it, and it was like the best thing ever.
It was like a slushy.
It was like a
stout.
slushy, and it was like condensed, and it was just like it was so good. I think I have it in a homebrew too, like a homebrew Imperial Stout I made.
Yeah, no, totally.
Some of the best beer we've ever had.
That reminds me, actually, Stockholm. Friends of ours, living over in Sweden, and we had actually been there a number of times. But Omnipolo, you guys familiar with that?
Yeah. They have gorgeous cans. Yeah.
Yeah. So Omnipolo, they have their brew bar is called Omnipolo's Hat, and basically they make this beer ice cream, and it's not ice cream. It's essentially like they take their beer. It's almost like a beer slushy. So they'll basically like, here's the beer, and then they'll basically put the slushy shit on top of your beer. And that was like a game changer, man. It was like amazing. Really cool brewery, cool place. Again, I don't know why these beer places always have like these artisanal pizza places next to them, or built in, but that's a good stop.
Beer and pizza, it works.
Yeah, man.
They get their numbers afterwards.
I'm going to give another shout out to another Swedish brewery because we are crazy Swedes, even though we're not Swedish. Well, you are a little bit, come on. But there's a brewery up and coming in Sweden called Stigbergets. It looks like it's spelled Stigbergets. Freaking amazing. Like, I have not had a bad beer from them, regardless of what the style is. So I don't know if they're actually exporting at this point, but that's something for people to check out. Stigbergets is awesome.
Amazing. You guys are definitely the perfect people to ask my classic wrap-up question to. You definitely have experience, probably as much experience as I have with this situation. You guys are busy. You're composing scores. You're improvising. You got to be fresh and on your toes. But every once in a while, it happens to everyone. What are your hangover cures?
Oof. I mean, I don't really have a hangover cure. I mean, for me, it's either going to be hair of the dog. So you're going to have another drink in the morning, or just keep sleeping.
Hair of the dog works, but you got to stop. That's the issue.
This is true.
Yeah,
You can't keep going
for like a week and a half.
You can't keep going.
Ibuprofen and Sudafed.
Interesting.
And hey, I'll pound that stuff. So for me, actually, electrolyte stuff, man. Not to get all, whatever, but like the magnesium, I'll just start like sipping on it towards the last hour or two. I'm like, oh, I can keep drinking. I'm like, no, you really can't. Start drinking some water, and I'll just start pounding like a 3-ounce shot of water with a little bit of that, and I'll just keep sipping on that in the last hour or two.
So that's planning, though. You're planning towards having.
Yeah,
a
I
good
have to,
morning.
because or else the next day could be rough. But if I'm already in rough shape the next morning, yeah, just sleep it off and hope that the Sudafed and ibuprofen kick in, and hope that you don't have anything to do the next day.
That is the thing.
The problem is the busier that we get, everything is organized. See, as much as everything is calculated in my band, it's the same in my life. So,
yes,
I get you.
Yeah,
I'm kind of compartmentalizing myself. You have to. Like
the next day you have to be somewhere. You have to be, teaching kids or something else. That's a rough day.
It is. I speak from experience. Rob, Will, thank you so much for hanging out with me, talking about your lives, music, and craft beer. Lots of craft beer. I'm very happy that we talked lots about craft beer. I've been doing lots of interviews recently where I say we talked a little bit about beer, but we talked a lot about beer today, and that makes me very happy. And I got to crack two. I got 2 more spaces in my fridge, thanks to you guys. I appreciate that. Massive cheers. Everyone go check out Crazy Swedes. Came out in September. It's an experience, and if you see it live, it's going to be a different experience, and I hope to do that one day soon. Massive cheers to you both. Cheers.
Cheers, man.
Hey, thank you all so much for listening right to the end. You know that I love and appreciate that. Man, this was an awesome hang. I immediately found beer-loving friends during this conversation. Massive cheers to Will and Rob for just being awesome. I cannot wait to hang out face-to-face. We've messaged each other a few times after we recorded this interview, talking about potentially meeting up, hopefully in 2023 at some point when they pop up here for one of their epic beer trips to Montreal. I am going to take them around, and we're going to have a goddamn good time. Very stoked that we talked a lot about jam bands, experimental improv styled writings. It's just very cool, something that's brand new for me, and I think it's super liberating and sounds very exciting. So massive cheers to Will and Rob. I'm stoked. Check out Crazy Swedes if that's something that you're into. Now, if you enjoyed this Vox and Hops episode, you should sign up to the Vox and Hops Podcast's mailing list. You can do that by going to my website, voxandhops.com. That's VOXANDHOPS.com. When you do that, you shall receive one email a week that will detail everything that is going on in the world of the Vox and Hops podcast. You'll get to see which episodes I dropped that week. You will get to see which episodes I have coming up. You also get to hear about any projects I have in the works. And trust me, I always got a lot of stuff going on. You will also get to see which albums the Vox and Hops album review crew have reviewed that week. And you will get to see which albums Jerry Monk, Vox and Hops' metal architect himself, has added to the Brutal Awakenings playlist. There is always a lot of things going on in the world of the Vox and Hops metal podcast, and I hate when you miss a single thing, so please sign up to the mailing list. The Vox and Hops metal podcast is brought to you by Sound Talent Media and Evergreen Podcasts. I hope you have a killer weekend. I will be back next week with yet again 2 episodes, one on Tuesday and another on Friday. But until then, remember to enjoy life, metal, and craft beer. Cheers, Vox and Hops heads.